go with the other. You don't know that yet. Keep that laptop we're talking about. And you'll be fine.
So would you rather have the meeting go a little longer there?
The hell are you two still here?
They're learning. Proceed.
So council, there's really a couple things I want to talk about tonight. Well, since this was just handed out to you, we'll kind of start with the feasibility study for the GO bond. I don't know how much you all have heard about it, but I talked to Mr. Myers and Ms. Barrett about it when I was in here a couple weeks ago, and they had some interest since the tax rate is dropping pretty significantly due to the assessed value going up for 2025. I think it went from 202 million to about 226 million, so it was around 11 or 12%. I think it's in here, 11 or 12% increase. Went from 202 million to 226 million. And that tax rate would be anticipated to drop from 2.2233 down to 2.0725. So with that, a lot of communities like to keep their tax rate level from year to year. So what the issuance of a GO bond would do, you would essentially issue for the amount of the decrease in your tax rate. So if you look on page 2, you'll see that tax rate between 2024 and 2025 is estimated to go down about 15 cents. So what the town can do is issue a general obligation bond, which can be used for pretty much any type of operating for the town, for that 15 cents, which would then bring your tax rate back up to the 2.2233 or approximately in that area. So with that amount of debt issuances, if you look on page 3, you will see this is the town's debt limit by state statute. So essentially, you take the net assessed value, multiply it by 2%. After you get that, you divide it by 3, which gives you the town debt limit. And then, of course, you have to subtract off any debt that's already been issued. However, the town doesn't have any general obligation debt. So at that point, you can use all of that town debt that is available, which is $1.5 million. And on the next page, which is page 4, you will see kind of an illustrated project cost and funding that we can do with that 15 cents. So with that, you would be able to have a net proceeds available for projects of about $1.3 million for 2025. There's also the underwriter's discount in there as well as bond issuance costs. We usually are conservative and estimate those high, so it's possible those could be lower. But we've got about $165,000 there. For a total of $1.5 million, and you'll see that annual debt service tax rate comes out to about 0.1469, rounding up to the 15 cents that we talked about that the rate dropped down. So with that, the annual debt service payment would be approximately $350,000, $348,000. On the last page, you can see there, that's just the amortization schedule for the $1.5 million. And as we kind of said, it's about $348,000. The first year would be $300,000, with the total bond debt service totaling out to about $1.6 million.
So this is a contingency backup plan, basically, right? Scott, in case there's a shortfall, is that kind of what this is?
It's more if you have projects outside. So if you have projects that you would like to fund that you're not going to be able to cash flow in the near future. So this illustration is for a 5-year debt issuance. So if you were to, you can't bring in that 15 cents because your estimated levy is what it is. You can only bring in that amount of levy.
Yeah.
But if you issue debt, then you can bring in the additional 15 cents that the rate is going down. So with that, it allows you to fund projects that you wouldn't be able to fund otherwise. So I know there have been some discussions on some of the projects that you'd like to get done. And by the time you would get to that process, you would need to know what projects you were going to use it for. That would all be in the bond documents. But really, this is just for illustrative purposes to let you know this is the amount that is available to you. If you didn't need the full 1.5, or I guess it'd be $1.3 million for actual project costs, we did run the numbers, and if you take 1 year off and just do a 4-year, that comes out to, for the same rate, about $1 million. So there are other options. This is just an illustrative to get you kind of to that max and how many years that would take you out. So, but you can do less than that max amount as well. So really for informational purposes to see kind of if the council would like to proceed with something, we can make that happen. It would probably take, from the time the council said go, probably about 60 days to get through the entire process, but could for sure get it done by the end of the year. It would kind of depend on whether it would be underwritten or a negotiated sale. My guess is that it would be negotiated because it's a relatively small amount. So shouldn't have any problems getting that done by the end of the year. If there is any thought that you do want to do it, we would need to know by the time the Form 3 goes out, because we would need to advertise that levy. Because if you don't advertise that levy, then you can't bring that levy in. So what we would do is in the budget process, we would add in an anticipated debt we would probably throw in a number like $400,000 for that debt service, because we know that would cover any of this. But if you don't advertise that, then obviously you can't bring it in because it has to be advertised.
So it's either do it now or we can't do it?
You don't have to still do it, but you have to advertise it. If you think that it's even a possibility that you want to do it, I would recommend advertising that.
Can we advertise it and then not do it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you can definitely enter that into the Form 3, advertise it to the public, and then not do it. You can always bring your budget and your levy down. You just can't go up from what's advertised.
Now, this is the first exposure that you've had with working with these.
Yeah, and actually, the guy from Indiana Bond Bank reached out to Dustin and I about it. Because this can be used for basically anything, right? Equipment.
Salaries or
It can be used for general operations in the town. Typically, it's used more for projects.
projects?
If it goes for salary, you would have to sustain it.
I was gonna say, you're not gonna be able to sustain those
Yeah.
salaries if you get them built up based on that. Then you really would have to continually issue debt for that.
It wasn't a bond.
It wasn't designed.
It was Bose McKinney.
Yeah.
It was Bose McKinney and Evans through Baird is who actually prepared the document. When they sent it over, they had only included the Johnson County numbers.
Have we ever done this before?
There's been GO bonds in the town's history, but it's been years ago.
When it was sent to me, I had a conversation with Dennis, that's our bond counsel, and then I did some research, and it is used in these circumstances, so you wouldn't be by far the only municipality that's done this before.
There are municipalities that have a rolling GO bond. They may just be for a year. They may issue that for the year so that they can bring those tax dollars in. They use it, pay it back, issue another one the next day, the next year. So there are a lot of other communities that do that.
As you guys know, it may be an opportunity, because I was talking to Dennis, where you got the expansion on 31 with the housing, you got a lot of infrastructure costs, so it could, I agree with Scott, you might as well do the first step that doesn't make you commit to doing it.
No charge or anything.
I mean, just the work to do that,
Yeah.
but advertise it, have it ready in case you want to do it.
Yeah, because like I said, it would have to be advertised as anticipated debt in order for you to actually have that done this year. Baird, as I said, is the one that prepared the original, I don't know if you can call it proposal, but the data that was sent over. You wouldn't be locked into Baird by any reason. You still get to choose your own bond counsel, which Bose McKinney is who we've used in the past. But you would not be locked into Baird by any, you could still select whoever. We've worked with Baird,
Yeah, I don't
there's
see
no
any
issue
reason
working
why
with them.
we wouldn't just start it.
I don't either.
Because I think it could be beneficial.
Yeah.
We had that
There's
conversation.
always opportunity. I personally would love to see it used for, so maybe a park and rec water pad type place.
Splash pad.
Yeah, I think that would be something nice.
It does help if there is something that the public sees.
Yeah, that's my
If you issue debt and you're just paying for, your operating, it's a little bit
Yeah.
difficult to justify to the public if they're not seeing something actually happen with those dollars.
So what do we have to do tonight, Scott, as far as any action decision making?
I don't know that there's any real action that needs to happen tonight. I just kind of wanted to get a consensus from you all to make
I
sure
agree.
that if we advertise it. There would be a lot of paperwork resolutions that would go through, that would be presented to you. And then our next step would be to talk to bond counsel, probably Boz McKinney and Evans. And start working with them on preparing documents. We would update this to whatever numbers the town decides were needed. So there would be a lot of back and forth between Baker Tilly and the council to proceed with that.
For advertising.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
So
Do you need a
Well,
motion?
I don't know that we need a motion because it's just really advertising the Form 3 at this point. Like I said, there will be a lot of formal presentations and formal documents that will come. So really, when Rhonda and I are working on submitting the Form 3, we'll walk through getting that anticipated debt in there. That way, you still have that flexibility. Which I'm going to talk a little bit more about the flexibility of that Form 3 here shortly when we talk about the budget. So, okay, with that, then I will take this back to Brian. Brian, you guys may or may not have met Brian Colton. He's the principal in charge of the Edinburgh account. So I'll work with him in getting all of that prepped and good to go. So, that was all I had on the GO bonds, unless anybody has any more questions. Okay, so everyone should have received another packet of documents similar to the ones you had last meeting for the budget. I did have Rhonda make a small adjustment to the Form 3 today and then update that for you all. But we may have some more adjustments as well. So if you want to start on page 1, that should be the preliminary overview of the remaining 2024 budget. Everybody have that in front of them? Okay. So discussing the budget, the only change as far as there were a few minor changes that were made, either correcting errors or removing a few things that were either unneeded or not fundable, but not in your main general funds. The only real change that you're going to see is for the police department. We went ahead and showed option 2, which was the higher option, just so we could show what that would actually do to the cash flows for 2024 and 2025. And then we made, like I said, a few other clerical errors that we had. Do you have a list of all the changes?
Yeah,
that
I
we
did
did?
gave them, but I forgot to do.
Oh.
To just kind of kind of update, kind of what.
So I'm sorry, which one is option 2? Is this?
And
one
you're
upside
not
down?
gonna have, well, you're gonna have option 2, but it's gonna be way back there on one of the pages. That's, let's see what page.
I should say on there what page the police is on that one note.
Police is page 8,
This is on 8.
and that's the only one that has multiple options.
So
So you'll see the police budget comparison report just looks a little bit different than the other ones that has an extra column. So there was 2025 proposed, and then there was 2025 option 2. You weren't here, Ryan, the last time. The last time we presented this cash flow, we had option 1 in the cash flow, which was the lesser of the two by about $100,000. So the cash flow that you're looking there, that front page, well, the front 4 pages, those include option 2 of the police budget, just so we can see kind of a worst case scenario.
These first 4 pages are option 2, or the amounts are of the police department of option 2.
Correct.
guys, I'm sorry, I don't want to make anybody upset. This is terribly presented. I'll be honest with you, I'm trying to figure this out and I got upside down paperwork here and
Well, the last meeting, we had them all separated out, and this is just a
this is a
synopsis.
condensed version of it.
But you still have all the individual departments.
So the first, break this down for me, because I'm playing catch up, obviously. I wasn't here for the first one.
So the first 2 pages that you're gonna have there, and it looks like maybe they're front and back for you, I don't.
Are they front and back?
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay, so the first, sorry about that, I didn't know they were front and back. The first 2 pages are the preliminary overview of the remaining 2024 budget. So that's gonna be the cash flows for what's left in 2024, June through December. And then across the top, you're gonna see the different funds there, and because there's so many funds, you're gonna see a subtotal on that first page, and then on the second page, you'll see the remainder of the funds. So the first page has kind of your major more major operating funds. Second page is more of your non-reverting operating funds or your non-DLGF rule funds. So really, we'll kind of look mostly at the general fund. So on that very first page, you will see the top has all of the different receipts. And I know, Sherry, you had a couple questions about how we decide what can be funded through this budget. So that whole top line right there, all of those line items are broken down by the actual receipts that the town's gonna bring in. So obviously, your two biggest are your property taxes, as well as your lit certified shares, that's your local income taxes. So you'll see at that first blue line, the total budget receipts for the town for the remainder of the year are $2.4 million. The second set of numbers there, the budgeted disbursements, those are what's left to spend of the current budget. So this cash flow is going to assume that you're going to spend every penny of the budget that was approved for 2024. So that's kind of why your budgeted disbursements look a lot more, than your budgeted receipts on the first page. Because typically, the town hasn't spent all of their budget. So again, we're showing it as if you're gonna spend all of your budget, but typically that hasn't happened. You know, that whether that's not being fully staffed, with the fire department that hasn't been staffed, so some of those funds just aren't being paid even though they were budgeted for. So you'll see between, on the general fund, you'll see that green is the change in fund balance. And you'll see that for the end of the year, you're going to eat into those cash balances by about $1.5 million. Again, not super concerning. Your estimated ending balance at the end of the year is still about $4 million. So now that we kind of walked through that format, there's none of these funds kind of on the front page for 2024 that really concern me too much. The local roads and streets for 2024 is still completely fundable. The budget that was originally presented to the local roads and streets for 2025 was not fundable. So once we get to that second or that third page, I'll kind of show you where we made a couple adjustments there. Are there any questions about that first two pages of cash flows? Is there anything that you want me to dive deeper into?
Scott, you always said we didn't want to have too much of a positive balance, basically, too much.
Correct.
This seems like there's quite a bit.
There is, are you speaking of general fund or all of the funds?
Yeah, general.
The general fund, it's a large cash balance, but actually by the end of 2025, it's a pretty healthy operating balance, I think it's just over 60% or maybe close to 70%. Yeah, close to 70%. So it's really not out of control at this point. And when we get to the 2025 budget, I'll show you that the budget's actually relatively balanced this year. So yes, from my personal experience, and I wouldn't say this is Baker Tilly's thoughts, but for me, for a government sitting on those
Also,
excess
5
cash
years we
dollars,
did it, so.
sitting on those cash dollars or those tax dollars, as a citizen, I would want to come and say, well, why am I paying these taxes if you're just going to put them in a checking account and draw interest on them? Why can't I keep them in my account and draw interest on them?
Yeah.
So that's kind of always been my personal opinion on the cash balances of the town. So let's go ahead and jump to the page that has the orange at the bottom. So these are going to look identical. The only difference is this is going to be estimated overview of the 2025 budget. So this is going to pull, if you look at the line that is just below the green line, the estimated beginning balance, that number is pulling from the end of 2024. So we're estimating that you're going to begin 2025 with $4.03 million in your general fund. And then back up at the top, you're going to see that the total budgeted receipts for the general fund for 2025 are about $5.1 million. Of that, about $2.4 million is property taxes, but again, you have your circuit breaker of about $680,000. So really, you're looking at bringing about $1.8 million in tax dollars. Your certified shares went up from last year to $2.6 million. And then that transfer in line item, you'll see that that's a transfer that we use to account for the fire EMS transfer to general to be able to use those fire EMS dollars. So we show that as a revenue to the general fund and expense to the NRO essentially. And then if you look at the budgeted disbursements, this is where I said that's going to include that option 2 for the police. So the budgeted disbursements are $5.4 million, which, as I kind of stated earlier, is a relatively balanced budget with a change in fund balance of about negative $279,000. So that's not a huge balance or a huge chunk, comparatively speaking. But again, it is something that you just want to keep in the back of your mind that, you know, if we do continue to eat into that cash balance, eventually, you're going to drop below that healthy operating balance. So I don't necessarily have any concerns with the budget as it is for 2025. Now, obviously, in this report, we're not projecting anything out for 2026, 2027, 2028, anything like that. But for this particular 2025, the budget is relatively balanced. And again, knowing that the town does not typically spend the entire budget that is approved, you could probably say that estimated ending balance is going to be a little bit higher by the end of 2025. And Baker Tilly is also, and the town has always been relatively conservative with revenue estimates. So some of those revenue estimates could be higher than what we're projecting, again, because we want to be conservative to make sure that we're giving ultimate flexibility and that we're giving a picture of what the budget could be, worst case scenario, by the end of 2025. So with that, you're looking at a $3.7 million ending balance compared to the $4.0 million beginning balance. So that's about a 70% operating balance, which is well above the recommended reserves. Again, we say between 15 and 50, with 25 just kind of being that ideal number. But anything above that obviously is good. So 70%, no issues there. So I will walk through the 2025 cash flows on a couple of these. As I mentioned earlier with local roads and street, we did make a change on that budget. So I think Clark had originally budgeted $150,000 in services and charges and maybe $25,000. Is that on here? I don't think that was.
I missed that one, sorry.
That's okay. I think it was closer to 175,000 or maybe somewhere in that range. By the end of 2025, that was not going to be fundable. So we did roll that budget back to $150,000 total. And again, that number was pulled to keep that operating balance right around that 15%. So you'll see for 2025, it's going to be about 16%. That budget has historically been spent.
Which one were you talking about?
Local roads and streets segment.
Road and street.
Local road,
Oh,
street, on
okay.
page 3 down the bottom.
So again, that budget has historically been spent for, usually it's used for contractual services, service and charges, for street work, road repairs, things like that. So, but again, I think that's the only cut we had to the budget because all of the other budgets were completely funded. So with MVH, that's another one of your major operating funds. You'll see $1 million in budgeted receipt, or $1.1 million in budgeted receipts, with total budgeted disbursements of $1.2 million. Again, eating into that cash balance by about $150,000, but ending the year at a 58% operating balance, which is very healthy. That does also include your MVH restricted fund. It's MVH and MVH restricted, even though the State Board of Accounts calls it a fund and a sub-fund, and within your general ledger, it's going to be two funds. For the purposes of the budget, we merge those two together. So that's going to be the cash that you have in your MVH and your MVH restricted fund. We also have the Parks and Recreation. The budget for 2025 that was submitted was $976,000, with budgeted receipts of about $962,000 for another relatively balanced budget, just eating into cash flows by about $15,000 in 2025, 53% operating balance. CCI, that budget was just plugged in based on the cash flows that we were going to have for 2025, and again to keep that 15% operating balance. So you have about $10,000 from CCI that you can use for projects. Similarly, with CCD, CCD is a rate-driven fund for those maybe newer to the council. That rate can be established up to 5 cents I think when the town adopted that years and years ago, it was at 5 cents. The way the statute was written years ago, as the assessed value would grow, the rate would drop on the CCD fund. They have amended that recently, and now the rate stays at what was adopted. So if you had already adopted and it had already started to go down, it flatlined at whatever rate it was at when that change happened. So I believe it's 0.023, I think is the rate. So you're kind of flatlined at that 0.023. So whatever the levy is, you're going to take that times the 0.023, and that's going to be the amount of revenue that you're going to bring in each year. So for CCD, that's planned to be about $36,000. You can, up until I believe it's March of the next year, you can reestablish that CCD fund if the council would like, up to that max of 5 cents. And then at that point, it would stay at the 5 cents. So pretty simple math shows that if you double the current rate, you're probably going to bring in about $70,000 versus 36. So there would be a little bit more each year for those projects. CCD is outside of your normal max levy. So it's not one of those controlled funds, it's in excess of those. So on the next page, we'll start rainy days on there, really just to show the cash balance. That's that first fund there. You'll see there are some things that are going to be running through the rainy day fund, as I'm sure you all are aware of. But with the transfers that have been planned from 2023 and 2024, there will be another $800,000 this year that will be pushed into the rainy day fund. So after all of those transactions go through there, we're looking at about $1.4 million that will be in the rainy day fund still.
And on that, the 2023 did not get moved last year, 22, right?
It was 422 approved in 23. So when I drafted a resolution or ordinance, whatever it was, to have that money moved, that $400,000. But before I left, I forgot to move that money. So I told Rhonda, just to be safe, I would just draft another resolution. You can still go back and move the money, but just to be safe, I would draft a resolution stating what budget year it's coming from. You've already passed one for the 2023 dollars, but just passed another one for 2022.
I'll have that at the next meeting. I want to.
So there's another 400 we can add to this?
That's included in here.
Oh, it's already
Yeah.
included, okay.
Yeah, I went back and adjusted the report and showed that on the 2024, you'll see $800,000 in transfers coming into the rainy day.
Okay.
So that's where that $1.4 million ends up coming from.
Yeah, because this amount is after we move the money out for the loan we just did tonight, and from what I understand, the DOT is going to come from here. And so, and then what's that?
We're showing in this cash flow $318,350 as a capital outlay expense, and then a temporary loan of $425,000.
And then once that 800 gets moved in, then it'll bring it back to this one.
Okay.
So onto the next, we have the Casino Riverboat, another pretty simple fund. That fund is just budgeted usually for capital to the extent that's possible. So you're going to bring in about $26,000 in 2025 and have about $90,000 available for capital projects, leaving it at 50% operating balance. Shelby County Edit, Bartholomew County Edit, both very similar funds and bring in a similar amount of revenue. One brings in 43, one brings in 35,000. The Shelby County Edit has typically been reserved for expenses at the golf course, just to keep the funds in that Shelby County area. The other has been used for park and rec operations in the community center downtown. So there's 60,000 budgeted for Shelby County Edit and 86,500 in the Bartholomew County Edit. Both of those funds ending the year at about 25 to 22% operating balance. Park and Rec NRO, that is strictly based on revenues that are brought in at the Park and Rec. Budgeting to bring in, again, we're conservative with, Daniel and I have always been conservative with those revenue estimates. About $317,000 budgeted to bring in. He would like to spend $401,000 out of that, eating into cash balances by about $83,000, but still leaving it at 53% operating balance. So again, that's maybe one that you just want to kind of keep an eye on. It's fundable this year. It is at a little bit of a deficit that you would want to keep an eye on for future years. but it's not a DLGF approved fund. So the council can kind of approve that budget as they see fit. Public safety, that comes from Bartholomew County and Johnson County. And you are budgeted to receive about $82,000 from those two counties. Those expenses have typically been used for between the fire and the police for capital outlay purchases, vehicles, machinery, things like that. So you'll have about $190,000 budgeted for next year, bringing it down to about a 20% operating balance. So if you spend all of that next year, you won't have quite as much to spend on those capital outlays in the future. And then lastly, the Johnson County Edit, which is your newest fund, or your newest, it was your newest fund when I left. It may have new funds now, but Johnson County Edit comes from obviously Johnson County. They passed that tax, I believe, in 2023. And it is going to bring in just under $400,000 in 2025. Budgeted to spend $531,000. Part of that is the salaries and wages for the planning department have been moved over to there. The rest of it is all capital outlays of about $350,000. There was a resolution passed in 2023 for those funds to be used primarily for downtown area and downtown development. Any questions on any of those cash flows? So the remainder of these, Ryan, unless you want me to, but these are all pretty similar to what we went through last time. I'm not going to go through those all line by line. We can kind of look at the notes that Rhonda put together of the changes that were made. I believe Rhonda noticed that one of the employees from the council had been moved to the public safety fund, but we had not actually taken them out of the council. So the council budget actually decreased from the last workshop because of that. And I think that was 60,000. No. It was between wages, FICA, and PERF. I don't know what the exact amount was, but it did decrease.
Julie had been paid out of council budget, and then she and Sarah got moved to the ed fund.
Oh,
And it was-
I thought he said public safety fund, that's why.
Did I say public safety? I may have inadvertently.
I didn't
Sorry.
forget.
Sorry.
I'll give her a badge.
Johnson County Edit Fund, I'm sorry, is where she was moved.
I did notice that the fire department didn't allocate any money for the 77 fund, but you guys did.
It was included.
It was included.
It was
You just
included.
didn't make a notation of it in the.
He
It's
probably,
only, I think it's only noted because it wasn't included at the last meeting.
It's, chief has, per line was increased, but Justin didn't.
that line item does include for the 77 fund for the fire. They both do, but I think when I was talking to Chief Little at the last meeting, we realized that when he did his increase for PERF, he didn't do it for the 77 fund. So the police budget was adjusted for option 1 and option 2 to show the 77 fund. So that's, as
Yeah,
Ron
but I
stated, I think that's the only reason that it is noted is because at the last meeting, it wasn't included.
Because I think Justin did include it in his.
Yes.
Yeah, it says increase since the HO, but yeah.
So it looks like clerk treasurer budget included $10,000 to pay for the meeting software. I think we briefly discussed that at the last meeting, didn't we? Fire budget. We talked quite a bit about the fire budget at the last meeting. Ryan, while you weren't here, we were discussing, he would like to, and I'm sure you're well aware, would like to move to a more full-time, less part-time scenario. So that was discussed at the last meeting, and that is how the budget has been proposed.
Yes, for 3 people, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we're
Yeah.
funding for 3.
Yeah, 3 full-time EMTs and less part-timers.
As an EMT, the full-time EMT, they won't be in the 77 fund. They won't be eligible for that.
And just for worst-case scenario, I believe, like, all of the full-timers were at
They should.
70 cents.
Unless I'm thinking of one of them, none of them are eligible. So as far as I know, none of the firemen are, that full-time we have currently, which is Joe, John, Justin, and Randy, are either in the pension system already
They're in the-
or
yeah.
currently too old to move into the pension system. So they won't be, they don't have anybody on it. Now, if we hire more firemen, obviously they would be subject to it, but
So I think the numbers that were put in there were just a flat 19% times the full-time wages. So if that's the case, you could either reduce it or you can just have it in there as that kind of buffer, kind of up to the council. You could always do a reduction in the next year if you needed to, or you can always transfer those.
the reason I ask is even in the chief's budget, he has up to the side 18.5% increase due to the 77 fund. I just didn't see it in Justin's. So if it's in there, it's in there. I just didn't see it noted to the side.
Yeah, it should be within those numbers.
Okay.
I don't think any of these other, we did change the sanitation budget. I think we're gonna add some payroll to that possibly.
Bob's part-timer, he asked if 66% of his pay could be paid out of sanitation since he takes care of the compactor and recycling, just to help alleviate some of the sewage expenses. So we did add that payroll in there. That part-time person.
And then we also accounted for the the contractual increase that will happen for the solid waste contract, but also because there will be, there's new homes at Timbergate. So your rate will stay the same, but obviously your cost will go up because you'll have more units. So we did account for that as well. Aside from that, I don't have anything else to present as far as like individual budget line items. Happy to answer any questions you have on them, or, we can discuss further if you'd like. As I kind of stated at the beginning, cash flow wise, all of these budgets are okay, at least for 2025. If you were to spend all of those budgets going forward, and if there were additional appropriations, it's possible that you could start eating into cash balances a little quicker. But historically, that hasn't been the case for the town. There's always been some leftover, as long as I was here, there was always some leftover budget at the end of the year.
Which gives us an opportunity to move to rainy day fund.
Correct. That's essentially how your rainy day fund's gonna get funded, is if you have excess money in your general fund or your general budget at the end of the year, then you can transfer that to the rainy day. So that's how that fund, that's really the only fund that you ever would move money for, because it says it has to be a non-dedicated fund, and really by statute, general is really only a non-dedicated fund.
So looking at the future, like you were always very good about, if we stay with this budget for 2025, is that sustainable into 5 years, 10 years?
If you were to spend all of the budget for every one of those years, then no, it would not be sustainable long-term. We can do some pretty quick math. I think it was $300,000 was just under $300,000 was the change in fund balance. So yeah, it would take about 10 years to eat into the cash flows if you were to overspend by $300,000 each year. Now, if you were to overspend by a percentage, obviously your percentage each year is going to go up. So if you did $300,000 and then it was $400,000, it was $500,000, it's not going to make it that 10 years. It would probably be more like the 6 to 7 year range. You would end up at a larger deficit than you would want. So, yeah. So as far as that goes, the next step for Rhonda and I would be to advertise the Form 3. The only thing, you have the Form 3 in front of you, actually. If you want to go to well, it was the last page, and then I had her preview me.
Yeah,
So the
if
new
you
document
did
that
it
you're
on your
seeing.
desk.
Oh, yeah.
The only adjustment that I made was on the CCD fund. And I just noticed that I had increased the CCD fund based on the previous year's levy instead of the current year's levy as far as the advertising. So just to kind of familiarize you all with the Form 3, this is the form that used to go in the newspaper. It doesn't have to go in the newspaper anymore. It goes to this budget notices webpage, and anybody can pull them from there. So the top of it is really just kind of boilerplate language that's in all of the forms. It just tells who the adopting unit is, where they can find the documents, things like that. The next little box section is going to be when your public hearing is, when your adoption is, times, and where that is. So your public hearing is scheduled for your next council meeting on 9/23. Your adoption meeting is scheduled for October 14th. Obviously, that was pushed back a little bit from our original schedule because of the GO bond discussion that we have been asked to bring to the council. So that next line there is, that number is automatically pulled in from the DLGF's estimate of your civil max levy. So you'll see there that they have estimated it at 4.68 million, which is exactly what we estimated it at. And then they throw in a circuit breaker number of 1.3 million. Our estimate was slightly less than the number that they came up with. I think it was more like 1.2 million. So on the left side down there, you'll see each one of your funds. Line 2 is the budget estimate. That's those forms that you had in the back there. That's all of those forms compiled and put into one budget estimate line. Line 3 is what you're advertising your levy at. So you'll see, just looking at the general fund, we are advertising at $2.8 million. Obviously, we know based on this estimated max levy that you are not going to be able to bring in that $2.8 million. The reason that we advertise high is kind of what I alluded to earlier with the anticipated debt. If you don't advertise high enough, you can't pull in those tax dollars. So if you were to advertise at $2 million and your max levy was $2.4 million, you would be missing out on $400,000 because of essentially adopting too low, advertising too low.
Could you tell me again what the levy means?
Yes, so the max levy is essentially the max property tax dollars that can be pulled in by the town. So yeah, the 4.68 is essentially the property taxes that the town can bring in. That's before the circuit breaker tax credits.
Okay, thank you.
So then, with their estimate here of the 1.3 million, you would take that off of the civil max levy to come up with your net levy, which is the amount that you would actually bring into the town. Again, we think that amount's going to be a little bit less just based on historical. The line number 5 is your current tax levy, so that is your actual levy for this year. So that's the 4.505 million. And line 6, there was a line in there for excess levy bills that you don't have. 6 is the change in levy percentage, so you will see that there's a large levy percentage increase for general and also for CCD. And again, that is just for advertising purposes to make sure that we're advertising high enough to give you full flexibility. The only thing that I thought about that we may, if the town has any thoughts that they may move levy between general, I don't see any reason that it would need to happen. But just to give yourself full flexibility, we may also increase the MVH and Park and Recreation for advertising purposes, just in case something happened that you would need to make a transfer before adoption. There would be room in there to transfer those. Because right now, say you decided that MVH needed $1.3 million because they weren't going to be able to fund their budget, but the general fund had too much and they could move some of that levy. At this point, you would have no issue moving it from the general, but you would have an issue taking it to the MVH because they haven't advertised high enough to be able to accept that transfer. So I think maybe we advertise that high too, just to give yourself that full flexibility. The advertisement only locks you in at the highest amount, so you can still make changes to your budget up until adoption as long as it doesn't exceed the amounts that you have advertised. Any questions on that form? The only other thing on that form is again the anticipated debt, since there is that even that chance that the GO bond, we will want to advertise that as well. With that, I don't have anything else in the budget unless there are any questions. Everyone okay with the numbers that they've seen? If there are any changes that any council members would want to see, I would recommend sending those to Rhonda and we can work together on having those adjustments made. But unless there's any changes as far as the advertisement goes, aside from us maybe increasing the MVH and Parks and Rec, as well as that anticipated debt, we'll go ahead and get that submitted by Friday. I think is the deadline. It has to be 10 days prior to the public hearing. Any questions on that?
Okay, so can you explain to me, what is NVH again?
That is your motor vehicle highway. You can think of it as a street department.
All those acronyms.
So yeah, that's the motor vehicle highway is the state name for it. Locally, it's probably called the street department more often. The reason I said earlier, the MVH and the MVH restricted, there is a portion of the state distribution that is given to the town that has to go into a restricted fund, that the uses for that have to be for essentially road repairs, rebuilds, new construction, things like that. So that's why there's a difference there. The only other thing that I had tonight is if I know I sent you, John, the comprehensive financial plan. I didn't know if you wanted any discussion on that at all, or.
I'm okay if you wanna talk about it,
It's up to you.
I'm okay if you wanna bring it out.
And just, so when I was in, a couple weeks ago, I was able to meet Mr. Myers. We discussed kind of, Ryan, the things that we were talking about, looking out more than just that one budget year to see how those cash flows are going to occur in the coming years. Baker Tilly does offer what we call a comprehensive financial plan. Essentially what that is we would look at 2 to 3 years of historical data, and then we would look at your current year data, as well as up to 5 years of future data to kind of see what those cash flows look like going forward to 2025, 2026, all the way up to maybe 2029. So if that is something, I sent Mr. Myers a sample that another local government has allowed us to share of what that document would look like, what it would include. Essentially, there would be a set number of funds that we would look at, and that would be based on the council's decision, Rhonda's decision, what funds we want to look at. Obviously, we're not going to look at all, 50 or 75 funds that the town has, but we're going to look at those major operating funds, your general funds, your street funds, those types of things, and again, project those out even further so that when we look at the cash flows of 2025 and see that there's a $300,000 deficit, well, we could look at what that's going to look like trending wise for 2026, 2027, 2028, and go further if we want to. So that is, if you want to see what that would look like, Mr. Myers and Mr. do have copies of that.
You can email those to you.
Can we email them to them?
Yeah, that's fine. We like I said, we did get permission from that unit to be able to share that with other entities. That's not something that you would probably start working on right away. It would probably be more of a December, January type project, because usually for us to prepare one of those, it's about a 3-month process between preparing the document, having draft meetings with either the council or the town management, however we do those, between actually a final product. It's usually about a 3 to 4 month process. So if you start working on that in January, you have that document for your budget process for the following year. So that's a good time to do those. So because that was asked, I wanted to just bring that document to the attention of the council and take a look at it. And if that's something that you want to see done, it is something that we can provide. That's all I have, sir. Unless you had anything else.
Never left Scotty, he should just.
Right back here.
We're back in the saddle, bud. More money right now.
It's not about the money.
But yeah,
Oh, it's always.
a little bit about the money. A little bit.
It doesn't hurt.
I mean, that yard looks a lot better now that you're.
Yeah, it's got them flowers, you even got yarn of the week.
You think I'm ready for flowers? I'm ready for those flowers. These don't come out of my way. Well, thank you, council, for allowing us.
Thank
to do
you.
that. We'll get started on that GeoBond stuff. We'll be in touch with you on that.
All I have, council all here, I just didn't want to bring up in an open meeting. It wasn't threat made by a 7-year-old kid about a gun.
Well, I'm sorry,
It
what?
was a threat
All right,
made, and we're addressing it.
okay, sorry. Make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Uh,
This wasn't bad.